Hello and welcome. My name is Dennis. I'm one of the pastors here on staff at Christ Church of Flagstaff. We just wanted to give you a little heads up that if you've been watching our services now for many months or throughout more than the last year, with COVID-19, we've put a lot of time and energy into making sure that this online experience really helps to connect us as best as the technology will allow. So many people have been joining us back in person, but we're going to continue to offer online church for those of you who need it or want it. Today's service is going to look a little different. You're going to notice there's no musical worship happening in the online service. There's also not going to be a guided communion meditation at the end. We're going to focus just on keeping you up to date with the teaching that's happening here, and we're really passionate about that portion. We know many of you tune in to watch that almost exclusively. We've been having a great time here in person, worshiping together, taking communion together here as we're gathered in the same physical space. And if you haven't had a chance to come back, I really invite you right now. Is a great time to be here. Throughout the entire summer, we're doing something called Party on the Patio. And we have our beautiful patio off to the side of our main auditorium. The weather here in Flagstaff is just incredible. And after each of our 3 morning services on Sunday, we just hang out. There's some bounce houses. If you've got kids, they can jump around. We've got some snacks. We just get to sit and fellowship with one another. And it's just so good to be back together. Coming up, I wanted to make you aware that Rooted is launching on June 23rd. If you haven't ever taken Rooted, you may want to go check that out. It's an experience where we learn more about what it means to follow Jesus, and especially in community. And so that's launching on June 23rd. You can sign up for that at ccof.church/events. Thanks again for tuning in. This actually marks the first week of a new series that we're calling Fomo, and you're going to hear all about that right now from Pastor Chris.
Welcome, Christ Church of Flagstaff. It's so great to be here with you, and we're starting a new series, and you're here for the very first lesson in Fomo. And the subtitle I love, where faith yields the greatest return on investment. We're going to talk about this the next few weeks. I'm so glad you're here. But let's start with that word, really that acronym that's become a part of our vernacular the last several years, FOMO, the fear of missing out. Do you have places, situations in your life, and you go, I don't want to miss out on that, or I might have a little fear. I experience fear. I'm not talking about like the fear of heights or the fear of snakes or spiders, right? Like that's a different thing. But what do you fear missing out on? Or do you wonder? Do you have a little bit of anxiety, fear that you might not have enough saved for that next emergency? Where do you see FOMO in your life? Do you look at your kids? Are they getting all the right experiences and opportunities? And you have a little bit of like, oh, I hope so. Or not having enough money to retire. You see that's coming sooner and faster than you thought. And it's like, I want to retire the way I've always envisioned. Maybe that's not going to happen. Do you fear that? Do you wonder that your social media presence isn't getting enough likes? Some of us, that's how FOMO started. It's a social media phenomenon. That your kids are going to miss out on that sports or dance scholarship. Some of us, if we're honest, have a little bit of fear that if Chip and Joanna showed up at our house right now, it wouldn't be clean enough, or they wouldn't approve of how cool it is, or the decor, or what we've done with it. Would they approve of us? That your truck isn't as tough as your neighbor's truck. I fear that sometimes. There's some guys on my street with some pretty tough-looking pickup trucks, and I wonder if mine would hold up to the standard. What do you fear? Do you fear your friends just had a Memorial Day cookout and you weren't invited and they're all keeping it a secret from you? Like, what? We all have some level of fear. And we all have this fear of missing out, that like life has something, or there's a reward or a goal or a plan that's not going to work out, right? Where do you see FOMO impacting your life? Where do you actually see, maybe more important than where you see it impacting your life or just your thoughts, where do you and I see this fear of missing out impacting our decisions? And maybe you'd put it in the comments right here as we're online together, and I'm so glad we are. But tell us, and here's what I promise: if you put where you see some FOMO in your life, I'll reply back very soon with where I see it in my life, because I think we all have it. So make a comment. Maybe you know someone who needs to benefit from this. Maybe you're in the room with someone right now, or in the car and you're watching this together, listening to it together. Talk about it. Where do you see FOMO not just impacting your life, but impacting your decisions? Especially think about, and let's just be aware, where is FOMO driving our decisions and our resources, our spending, our family budget, or lack thereof? And have you ever wondered, is there an alternative to this FOMO, to this place we find ourselves in, having to spend more and do more so we don't miss something? Have you ever looked inside and seen a little bit of that angst and wondered, can I fix this? Is there an alternative? Well, so we have this letter in our Bible where several of the weeks in this series, we're going to spend some time looking at what God's word with these letters from early followers of his. And we have this letter in our Bible. It's from Paul. That as he started to follow Jesus, his life turned totally upside down. In fact, as we first meet him, as a part of this group called the Pharisees, and they've been labeled in our scriptures as people who loved money and were consumed with wealth. And he's a part of that group. And then later in his life, as he's older, more mature follower of Jesus, his life's radically changed. He writes a letter to Timothy, one of his young people that he'd been mentoring as a leader in God's family. And this is what he says in his letter to Timothy, his first letter, chapter 6, verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. I wonder if this could help us with our FOMO. Godliness with contentment. Another translation of the Bible, one a little bit different than mine, words it this way. You gain a lot when you live a godly life, but you must be happy with what you have. This letter, I think it has so much for us in this just short statement. You gain a lot when you live a godly life, but you have to be happy with what you have. I mean, I think we could just put this lesson together, right? That contentment, what it said in the first translation, is simply being happy with what you have. And friends, I think contentment is this key. Paul says it this way in another letter to another group of people. He says, I've learned to be content no matter what happens to me. So if we all have a little bit of FOMO, and FOMO is driving our decisions, especially driving our financial decisions, I think we could learn from this follower of Jesus, Paul, when he says things like this. I've learned to be content, and that contentment is being happy with what we have. I think one of the first things we have to recognize, and it's right here in this statement, is that word learned. Contentment is something we learn. So if you're having a hard time, and FOMO is driving decisions, it's driving spending and financial good choices, bad choices, what if we could learn a different way? And if in the times that Paul and Timothy lived, that contentment was a necessary lesson to learn. I mean, in ancient times, a simpler world, no comparisons on social media, but he has to write in his letter what this verse and many that we're going to read today and in the weeks to come about finances, about resources, about contentment. How much more today? Don't we need to learn contentment? I know I've needed to learn it in my life. One of the places I've watched and learned it the most is from my wife's family, from her parents. They've just taught so many amazing lessons to me and to the rest of our family about these topics and these issues. One of the things they did many years ago, they started taking grandkids and parents on graduation trips. I think lots of families do this. Maybe yours does, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter. A few years ago, my son graduated high school, and this is me and him and his grandpa in Washington, D.C. We're in the Capitol Rotunda. It was a really cool experience. We had a great trip. And then last week, my daughter, who graduated high school a year ago in the class of 2020, didn't get to go on her graduation trip with grandma and her mom because of COVID and all the obvious things, right? We all missed things last year. She did. They did their graduation trip to Hawaii. And so Jake and I have already gone with her dad and with his grandpa and Susie and Christy and her mom in Hawaii. And while they were in Hawaii, I was doing something really spectacular. And I started to find, even in my spectacular trip, a little bit of FOMO. See, my brother has lived the last several years in Phoenix with his family, his wife and kids, and they decided they wanted to move back home to Oklahoma, where we all grew up and where she's from. And it's a really cool, long story. If we ever sit down, I'll tell you about it. But he said, hey, would you help us drive? So last week, Christy and Susie and Sue are in Hawaii. I'm in New Mexico driving, and we stop at the gas station, and I'm with my brother and his wife, and we're driving their two vehicles, and they have 4 kids, and they have a little Chihuahua named Cubby, who's named after the Chicago Cubs, so I'm not super excited about hanging out with a Cubby. And they have a turtle and a guinea pig. And we drove 1,000 miles from Flagstaff to Oklahoma. And while we're in New Mexico, we're stopping to get gas, waiting for our food. Quick stop, fuel up, get some food, bathroom. We're going back on the road. Kids, dog, guinea pig, turtle. I mean, you're jealous, I know. And I look at my phone, and I see pictures of my wife and daughter, my mother-in-law, on the Big Island in Hawaii. I had some FOMO. I was a little discontent with my current situation, that even on a 1,000-mile road trip with a Chihuahua, is contentment even possible? Friends, contentment is something we need to learn, because it's not my default setting. It's not your default setting. It's nobody's. And I've watched this from Christy's parents. They're such great examples, and they prioritize these trips with our families and our kids. And they could be living in a bigger place. They could be investing more for the future. They could be prioritizing all sorts of things. But they decided to choose memories over money. I want to have that kind of impact in my life, and maybe you do too. And it's not always about trips to Washington, D.C. or Hawaii. That's not the point. It's what are you prioritizing? What are you doing with what you have? See, they've learned contentment, to live on less so they can do more with their families. I wonder what would be different if there was more contentment in my life. You ever wonder what would be different in your life? Would you have as much consumer debt if you learned contentment? Would other people's pictures make you jealous like Christy's pictures made me jealous last week? Would their houses, would your sibling rivalry over the type of vehicle you drive, would it be different? When you look at your friends' families and their kids and what their grandkids are doing and accomplishing, their seemingly perfect marriage, what would be different if you and I learned contentment? I wonder if we could worry a little less. Enjoy the moments of life that God brings us in all the small and big ways that they come. If we can learn to be a little bit more content. See, I've seen over and over again in my life, Christy and I have been married 25 years and doing our own thing and financially and making our own decisions for a quarter of a century now. What I've seen in that time is that when we go on a vacation or we buy clothes or we're driving a vehicle that we can afford within the means that God gives us. Because what we have is what God has entrusted to us. That's what this teaching tells us in his word over and over again, is what you and I have is what he thinks we can take care of. And when we go on vacations and buy clothes and drive vehicles that fit within those means, the vacation is just a little bit better. It may not be as exotic or far off or as expensive, but it's way better than the vacation we have to pay off on a credit card later, for years or for months later. Or clothes that we really don't need or can't afford, or a vehicle that just doesn't make sense for that situation or that time. I remember back 1997, Christy and I have been married a year. I'm finishing up an internship at a church in Tucson. I've been a youth ministry intern, and I'll just be honest. They said, "Hey, we want to keep you on, and we're going to double your salary." I was so excited. See, I was going to go from a $12,000 annual salary. Write that down: $12,000 annually to $24,000. I thought we will never have financial problems again. I immediately went out and made 2 purchases. Maybe you guess what they are. I'll give you a second. Put it in the comments. What would you guess? Well, here's what it was. I went to Sears. This is how old school this story is, right? I went to an actual Sears, and I bought a gas grill. Oh, I was so excited because now I'm rich. I'm gonna buy all these really great cuts of steak and meats and barbecue them. And then Christian and I went and we leased. Yeah, you heard me right. We leased a Honda Accord. See, we had a car and it was paid off and it ran fine, but it wasn't cool. We wanted a second car. And the finance people at that particular car dealership showed us our scores and our credit reports and all the stuff, the information they pulled, and they said, "You don't quite qualify for purchasing this Honda Accord that you want, but we can get you in one today with a lease and these affordable payments." And friends, that car was amazing for about 45 days. It was quick. It had a manual transmission, so that made it fun to drive around town. But you know what happened, right? The 45-day mark, right around there, I go out and I get the mail, walking it back to our apartment, and I'm looking at my cool white Honda Accord. And then I got a bill from Honda Financial Services. And I opened up that bill and I saw the monthly payment that I had seen before 45 days earlier in the office, but I hadn't really thought through it, right? And then I get out my checkbook and I go through the ledger and I look at the balance and I go, oops. The money I needed to pay the bill wasn't there. The Fomo, it was driving our decisions. We had friends who had 2 cars in our same situation, our same age. We worked in different places in town. And looking back, I worked about 2.5 miles from where I lived. What I should have done was went and bought a bicycle and let Christy drive the car to work, or got a bus pass, but I was just not thinking right. I was too proud. There was no way I was going to get a bus pass or a bike or make my wife take a bus to work. See, contentment is something I had to learn. It's something you have to learn. It's not our default setting. What would be different in your life if you learned contentment? Let's go back to what Paul said, this incredible advice to see what he wanted Timothy to learn. He says, contentment, being happy with what you have. And the very next thing he says, you didn't bring anything into the world. You can't take any of it out of the world. If we have food and clothing, we will be happy with that. He's learned contentment. He said people who want to get rich are tempted. They fall into a trap. They are tripped up by wanting many foolish things and harmful things. Those who live like that are dragged down by what they do. They are destroyed and die. Oh, this is hard, right? This stings a little bit, this plain language. He says people want to get rich. We're being tempted. I found myself there sometimes. We fall into a trap. We're dragged down by what we do. And friends, when it comes to FOMO, when it comes to our finances, our decisions, that our fears, our desires, our anxieties drive, we think about our intentions. We think about the future in some unrealistic setting and situation that's going to change. And what Paul says to Timothy in this great advice is what drags us down is what we do, not what we intend or what we wish or hope. This plain language, it stings sometimes, doesn't it? I know it does for me more in the past than it does in the present, but sometimes I still find myself struggling here. I know you don't think you're trying to get rich. None of us do. You just might even be getting ready to go like watch something else online. Don't, because this does apply to you and me. Right? I don't think I'm trying to get rich. None of us would ever admit that. It's not like some popular virtuous thing. I'm trying to be greedy and get rich and go against what this says. Right? We just want to have enough to be prepared. We just want to have enough to where our kids can go to college. We just want to make enough money that we never have to worry about money. I don't know how many times I said that back in the day. I just want to have enough to not worry about it. Well, how much is that? We don't want to be rich. You just want to be comfortable. I get it, and that's not bad, but it's actually just an illusion. We're just changing the words. We're just trying to help our families. We want to leave a legacy. We just want to leave a little something behind for the next generation. We're not trying to get rich. I know Paul is giving Timothy advice. It's only for Timothy. It's only for ancient people or for those really greedy folks. That couldn't be for us today, could it? About what he says next. I mean, this is so plain. The love for money causes all kinds of evil. Some people want to get rich. They have wandered away from the faith. They've wounded themselves with many sorrows. Friends, as a pastor for 25 years, I know this verse to be true. I know it to be about myself, to be about you, and so many other people who never intended to let the pursuit or the love of money and riches make them wander. But see, when we look at the ancient Hebrew writings we call the Old Testament, we look at the life, the biography of Jesus, the letters of Paul and Peter, and so many of the New Testament writings of the early followers of Jesus, money and possessions throughout this entire collection of writings we call our Bible, money and possessions through the whole Bible are seen as tools and as tests for the followers of Jesus. You want to overcome FOMO. I want to overcome the FOMO that drives my decisions, that drove me to leasing a Honda Accord back in the day, right? I think one of the things you and I need to do is start to see money, what God's given you, what he's entrusted to you, what you have right now, however much or however little it is, see it as a tool. See it as a test. See your money as tools and as tests. What do I mean by this? It's really this idea of what drives your decision? What can you do? Let's talk about your money as a tool. What can you use the resources, friend, that you have right now? Not the resources you're going to have when you win Powerball, next time the number's drawn. I don't know when it is. Not the money you're going to have later when you sell your house and you have all this equity you're going to cash out. Not when you get that raise, not when you pay down those debts or get rid, just over this next stage or this next hump of like challenge. Not then, not future you. But what could you do with the resources you have right now that would impact God's kingdom? What could you do and use the resources you have now to make an incredible impact? What could you do with your money to have a long-term difference? In the investment world, we call this ROI. How can you have the greatest return on our investments? See, God's given you something. Some of us, he's given us a lot. Some of us, it doesn't feel like we have a lot. Things are tight, and it's been a hard season. And all those situations are real and true, but what can we do to make an impact? And friends, so many of you who are part of this church and my family, you give and you're making an impact. And I want to say thanks and keep making that impact. And maybe you used to do that. Or maybe it's something you want to do in the future. I don't know what category of investment into God's kingdom and return on your investment and using what God's given you, your money as tools, and understanding the tests of our heart and our priorities. I don't know where you are in that. But I have an idea that all of us could make an investment right now. Right here, this is the summer of 2021. And one of the things that's really exciting going on in our church right now is our kids, our young people, grade school, middle school, high school, we're going to camp. We're going to United Christian Youth Camp in Prescott. In fact, in a couple weeks, I'm going to be a leader at middle school camp. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. But what if you and I could invest in camp this summer for our kids? Whether you're already doing that with our church or in other places or you're not. Whether you have a lot, whether you have a little. What if we all did this? See, I have an idea. 5 families in the last 2 weeks, real families in our church have said we need help. Those 5 families need help financially to get their kids to camp. We help all families that ask for that. We do everything we can. And these 5, we're getting close, and we're here at the end of the season, and the kids are going soon. What if you and I helped those 5 families right now? What if each of us, whether we're giving or not giving, we've never done this, we used to, we want to, we're skeptical, we're not sure. What if all of us just gave $10 to help send kids to camp from these 5 families? And then if 5 more come up this weekend or tomorrow or next week, we're ready, we're prepared. What if you and I could give just $10 to start to help send kids to camp? You could do that. If you already do it, you know how. If you don't, you can text the letter CCOF to 77977. You're going to see a link, all the things you need to donate. $10. And friends, I know that's going to be like some things you got to do. You got to put in the information. You got to just take a couple of minutes. But isn't it worth it to invest $10 and see what the return is? What do you fear missing out on? What you could do with a few dollars? Or what God could do with that same amount in the life of a child, of a young person, a teenager who's had a stressful year, who's got Zoom fatigue and needs to go outside and spend some time in a great setting and do zip lines and have Bible studies and worship and all the things that are going to happen at summer camp. So much fun. What if you invested in that? Because here's the thing I know, and I've seen my whole life, in my own life, that the only path to contentment, and this you can find in here as well, the path to contentment is always through generosity. Being happy with what I have is being generous with what I have. Putting it in God's kingdom, investing in his causes, doing things exactly like this opportunity before us, helping 5 families from our church, from our community, be able to send their kids to camp and not miss out on that opportunity. What if you and I were to practice contentment through our generosity and just take one step together? Don't miss out on that. Don't let the opportunity of generosity and these lessons of the series of Fomo pass you by. I hope you'll share this. You'll like this. You'll think of somebody else who you can invite to join us for church next time, because we're going to look at even more how you and I can overcome the fear of missing out that's so rampant among us, and practicing the generosity and the contentment that God has for us. And I pray that these families will be able to send their kids to camp without any worries or any fear of their own. Let's pray and ask God to help each of us. I'm going to pray for me, you pray for you, and I'll pray for you, that God will teach us contentment in this season, this summer. God, we want that. We simply ask you to make our heart more content, more happy with what we have, because ultimately what we have is coming from you, God. So let us be content. It is not our natural wiring. It's not our default setting. It's something we've got to learn. So God, help us learn it. And I pray that many of us will take a step towards it in this generous season of helping kids go to camp, of just practicing some generosity, one step. Maybe it's $10. God, maybe you have some different plan. We ask for your help. We ask for this lesson. We want to learn it. We want what contentment offers. Don't let us miss that. We ask all this, God, in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.